Welcome students to another in our Investigating Science series. Today our focus is on developing hypotheses. We're in grade 5 looking at sounds, and we want to be able to develop testable statements called hypotheses when conducting investigations on sounds. So our first question is, of course, what is a hypothesis? Let's see. You may remember in grade 4 when you would have been introduced to the scientific method, you would have looked at the steps that scientists use to carry out an investigation. Now, in the first case, they would make an observation. So something in their environment that would attract their attention, they would use that to ask a question. Now, usually, after making an observation, scientists would now create a hypothesis statement. Okay, so what is that hypothesis? Okay, your answer may be that the hypothesis is an educated guess. But how do we actually get to craft a statement that can be used for a hypothesis? We're going to find out. So from last time, when we're looking at sounds, we were able to determine that different sounds, different objects make different sounds. All right? So we're going to play around with these elastic bands for a bit. So I have elastic bands that you can get at a store or shop, right? And I have come with 3 different types of elastic bands, all right? And I want you to be able to look at these. So this is one of my elastic bands. It's the more common type. I have another type of elastic band. You can see that this elastic band looks a bit thicker than elastic band number 1. And we're going to have a third elastic band, and of course if you look closer you'll see that this is even thicker, right? So we have 3 elastic bands. Unfortunately they're not the same length, but for the purpose of this investigation we're just going to play around with them first to see what happens. Now suppose you get your elastic band and stretch it across 2 pieces of stick, 2 pencils, or some container, some object like this, and the idea here is to stretch your elastic bands, right? So we're stretching this band first. Let me just take up this. And we're just going to see what happens when we pluck it. So remember, yes, we get our sticks, stretch our elastic bands across whatever object we have chosen, and we're going to try to pluck it. All right, we're not sure if you're hearing that sound. Let us see what happens when I pluck this one. This one is stretched a little further across the entire stand. Okay, now suppose I were to try stretching the larger, the thickest elastic band. What do you think would happen? Okay, so let's see if we can do that. All right, now let's see if we can listen to the sound. All right, so let's compare. Do you hear a difference? Okay, you're working that out. All right, so let's try our third. Sorry. Let's put this down here. So we now have our 3 elastic bands stretched on this stand. And we're going to pluck to see how the sounds change. Okay, all right. Now, do you observe anything? And remember, in science, when we speak of an observation speaks to how you get information using your 5 senses. So it's not just what you see, but in this case, it's also what you hear. So when I stretch my elastic bands and I stretch them across this surface, I notice that I'm getting a different sound, right? And that's my observation. Now, using that observation, we want to be able now to develop a statement that can be used for our hypothesis. So, if I should design an investigation, what could I say? How could I word my hypothesis, my statement that is to be tested? I could say, for instance, if I pluck elastic bands of different thickness, the pitch of the sound could change. So I am making a statement that I can now use to design my investigation. What else could I say that could represent a hypothesis? We could say, for instance, if we had different lengths. So say, for instance, I had the same thickness for my elastic bands and somehow I got them at different lengths, then it's possible that when I stretch them, again, I would get a different sound. Good. So that statement becomes my hypothesis. I can now design my investigation and check to see if my hypothesis is supported. Right? So how would I design this investigation? To design this investigation, we look at our hypothesis, right? Which stated that if I pluck elastic bands of different thickness, the pitch of the sound could change. Good. I would now need to make sure I have different elastic bands of the same length, yes, but different thickness. And so there's a template that we can use to design our investigation. And the first thing that we want to answer is, what are you trying to find out? That is your aim. So you write down that question, what are you trying to find out? And based on that, you can now determine what you will be looking for in your investigation. The second question is, what materials are you going to test? So what are we testing here? We are testing elastic bands of different thicknesses. Our next question then is, what will you measure? So we have to find a way to either measure the length of our elastic bands, because remember, we could change how far we stretch it, right? And see how that affected the pitch. Okay, this is my little apparatus here. You can get something that is more sturdy. So if I change the length, right, then I would have to ensure that I measure that length. If I use this length, I would have to measure that length. And I would have to try to keep, in this example, keep the same length, but change the thickness. Okay, so we're measuring, whether we're measuring the length that we stretch our elastic bands or the thickness of our elastic bands. Next question we want to look at is, what will you keep the same? So, do you think I should have this elastic band at this length and these two at that length? Would that be correct? No. In our investigation, we have to try to keep some things the same. And in this case, we would ensure that we have our elastic bands at the same length, right? And we do that to do what? And we have to use the same object to stretch them across. We can't use pencils for one and this object for another, right? We do that to ensure that we have a fair test. Now, what other question could we try to answer in our investigation? What will you change? What are we changing? In this investigation, what are we changing? We are changing the thickness of our elastic bands. So you get elastic bands of the same length and we only change the thickness. Why do we do that? Because in a scientific investigation, if we change too many things at the same time, we won't know what is affecting the investigation. So in this case, we're only changing the thickness of our elastic bands. And we keep everything else the same. And that will ensure that we have a fair test. So we have answered what we're investigating. We have put together our hypothesis statement, right? We have determined what we're changing, what we're keeping the same, and what we're measuring. Now, in an investigation, we have to also record our material. So what did we use? We used different elastic bands. We probably used 2 sticks or 2 pencils to stretch, or whatever object that we use, we would record that as our equipment. So equipment, all the materials that we use in our investigation. And then of course, we would have to have a method or the procedure. What are the steps that we're going to use? So the steps would be, for instance, get 3 elastic bands of different thickness, stretch elastic band across an object or across two pieces of sticks, right? Pluck each elastic band 2 or 3 times. And of course, listen to the pitch to determine whether it is high, low, or medium pitch. And of course, we can put all of these results that we get in a table. So our table will have elastic band 1, the length at which it was stretched, or the thickness that we noted the elastic band had. And then of course, we're going to put in another column, what is the pitch? Is it high pitch? Is it low pitch? Is it medium? And we're going to tick it as soon as we pluck our elastic bands. So we have steps that we record to set up our investigation. And afterwards, we just simply conduct our investigation and see if our hypothesis was supported. So in this case, did we prove that our hypothesis was correct? Has the pitch of the sound changed based on the thickness of the elastic bands? Yes, it has. And so we can make our conclusion that the pitch of the sound is affected by the size, the length, or the thickness of our elastic bands. And that would be our investigation on the properties of sound. So I want you to look around you, see what other things you can investigate, try to come up with your own hypothesis statement. A good way is to use an if-then statement. If I do this, then what will happen, right? So try doing that and see how well you can develop your own hypothesis. So in our example, it was if the thickness of the elastic band is changed when plucked, then the pitch of the sound would be affected. That's all for today, boys and girls. See you next time when we'll investigate another science concept happening in your everyday life.